Great. Well, we're going to try to get going as close to on time as possible. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Drew Bennett. I lead the software and content licensing team here at the University of Michigan. I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague Ashwathi Iyer, as well as I wanted to shout out Tina Suntras, who's the third member of our team helping with the series today, and she's out today, but just wanted to thank her. So we're going to do a quick introduction, but Innovation Partnerships is the hub for IP management out of the university. We're here to help you if you're an innovator, PI, researcher throughout campus with everything from IP management, specifically protection and approaches to that, as well as strategy, licensing, commercialization, and translational development of your innovations, and of course, assistance with startup as well. So as you continue to do all the great work that you do across campus, remember us, and we look forward to helping you out. This has been a great year for this series. We've had this series for a couple of years now, the Software Thought Leadership Series. We started the year off with a great open source talk from Heather Meeker in the fall. And then earlier this spring/winter, we had a great conversation about FDA regulation as it relates to software. And today we're going to wrap up the academic year with, of course, the hot topic of the day, Chat GPT. And then we will kick things back off in the fall. We were somewhat joking before the meeting started that maybe we'll be repeating this exact webinar, in October, and see how good of prognosticators we are as far as what things are going to happen with these large language models and activity around these technologies. So thrilled today to be joined by two really great folks and people I really enjoy working with. I think are wonderful resources for everybody on the call. And the intention today is really to think about, if you're using Chat GPT, not so much from the technology standpoint or what it can do for you, but what does it mean when you're using it? So what are you actually agreeing to, maybe consciously or unconsciously, with respect to terms of service, privacy policy, and related agreements when you're submitting content? What can you do with your IP on the other side of it? What are the intellectual property considerations when you use things and tools like this? Who owns what, and how does that work? So today we're joined by Brian Doughty from the Office of the General Counsel here at the University of Michigan. He's an embedded member of the attorney group here in Innovation Partnerships. We're fortunate enough to get his advice and support on a daily basis. So he's going to walk through some things initially about those aspects of the actual agreement you're signing up for when you use the tools. And then another great partner that I'm fortunate to work with on a regular basis, Randy Ruth from Marshall Gerstein Bourne, who's one of our outside counsel groups that we work with. Randy has done a number of patent protection activities for me and for a variety of innovators across campus, and has a really good deep knowledge of patenting around software. So with that, we'll cut to the chase and let Brian get started and start to learn about things we should be thinking about.
Sounds good. Thanks, Drew. And as Drew said, my name is Brian Doughty, and I'm going to be talking about Chat GPT from the agreement and terms of use side of things. So the thing that kind of seems to be on the top of everyone's mind when talking about Chat GPT from our perspective is who owns the content generated by Chat GPT. And the short answer is that it's complicated and that it depends. And it might be simpler to discuss who doesn't own the content and what that means. So when I was researching for this, I found a response in an article that ChatGPT itself gave to this question. So if you ask the system who owns the content generated by ChatGPT, it will tell you that ChatGPT, do not own the content that I generate. I'm a machine learning model developed and owned by OpenAI, and the content generated by me is subject to OpenAI's license and terms of use. So even the system itself can't give a short, concise answer to who owns the content. It says it's subject to OpenAI's license and terms of use. So what does that mean? We'll go over some of the specific relevant provisions of those terms of use, along with some of the other agreements that ChatGPT has in place. But I wanted to emphasize that who owns the content that gets generated by ChatGPT is it's really a contractual matter And you have to reference these agreements that are in place. Something else to remember is that today we're talking about Chat GPT specifically, but there are other language models like that are out there. There's Bard, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. There's many others that are out there. All of them have their own user agreements and terms of use. So be sure that if you're using one of these systems, that you look into what those terms are for that particular system, because the advice given in regard to Chat GPT might not be applicable to another one of these services. Another thing to remember is that because this technology is so new, that the agreements that go along with these services are constantly evolving. So like Drew said, we might have to be back here in 6 months reviewing the updates to the terms of service for Chat GPT. So the three main agreements that I'm going to be talking about today are the terms of use, the usage policies, and then the privacy policy for Chat GPT. Each of these has some different terms that are going to be applicable to the user base, and I thought this was a sensible way to split up the analysis. So the first one that we're going to talk about, as I said, was the terms of use. This governs general usage requirements of the system, payment terms if you use one of the versions that requires payment, dispute resolution. But the terms that we're going to focus on today are the content terms, because those are the terms that govern what happens to the things that you put into ChatGPT, as well as your rights to the outputs that you receive from the system. I put one of the introductory terms of the terms of use right here just to emphasize that you agree to the terms just by using the service. They're really not negotiable in most circumstances. And so simply by using the system, you agree to be bound by these terms. And in the terms of use, it references some of the other agreements like the privacy policy, which we will touch on a little bit later. So section 3A of the OpenAI terms of use, this is really what governs the content of the system. And OpenAI defines content to encompass both the input, so the things that you put in, as well as the output, the answers that ChatGPT generates to you. So when it's talking about them together, they call them content, and sometimes they talk about just input and sometimes just output. So know that content covers both of those things. And section 3A says that as between the parties and to the extent permitted by law, you, the user, own all input. And so that covers input. And then with regards to output, subject to your compliance with these terms, OpenAI hereby assigns to you all its right, title, and interest in and to the output. So you own the input, and you OpenAI assigns its rights to you in the output. This applies to the use of the content for any purpose, including commercial purposes, as long as you're in compliance with the terms of use. And there's a couple of points that I think that are important to pay attention to when looking at this term. The first is that this is only as between OpenAI and the user. It doesn't account for any third-party rights that could be at play. So for example, if what ChatGPT generates to you in an output contains copyrighted material that is owned by a third party, this doesn't wash that third party's rights away. OpenAI can't grant you rights in somebody else's copyright. So it's only between OpenAI and you. It's saying that OpenAI doesn't own it. The user owns the input, and the user has rights assigned to it by OpenAI for the output. This is why users should be careful about using the output directly from ChatGPT. You may or may not have all the rights necessary to use that output. It's the agreement here just says that OpenAI is not going to claim ownership over the output. The other important thing, a related point to look at here, is that OpenAI assigns to the user all of its right, title, and interest, and not all right, title, and interest. What they're saying here is whatever rights OpenAI has, it assigns to the user. But as Randy's going to be discussing a little bit later, it's likely and possible that OpenAI doesn't have as many rights in the output as it might seem. They might not have the copyright in it or other types of rights. So you're getting whatever OpenAI can assign to you, but it might not be sufficient to use the outputs of Chat GPT without adding your own contributions to that content. Now, as to the output, OpenAI, as I was just saying, they grant the user all of its rights to the output, but OpenAI retains a license to use the output to provide and maintain its services and enforce its policies, but not to improve its services if you use the API version of the product. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So OpenAI, they retain the right to use content, which that covers input and output, to provide and maintain its services, comply with applicable laws, and enforce policies. So the first two parts, or the last two parts, that is to comply with applicable laws and enforce policies. That's likely referring to if they had to use your inputs to the system to answer a subpoena or a similar court order to provide information that a certain user provided to the system. And enforcing policies likely means that OpenAI will use the inputs as evidence of a user violating its terms of service. So for example, if a user's input showed that they were using the system for a prohibited purpose, the company's retaining the right to use those inputs to prove a violation of the policy or something like that. The provide and maintain the services is slightly less clear, but it stands to reason that probably means that they can use your inputs to train the current model of the system in order to improve it. Now, further down in section 3, when you get to section 3.c, it says that we do not use content that you provide to or receive from our API to develop or improve our services. They go on there to say that if you are not using the API version, we can use content to develop or improve our services. So this only refers to the API version of Chat GPT. So that means if you're incorporating the Chat GPT API into your own product or your own website, the content associated with that, whether it's the input or the output, that they don't use to improve their product. They don't use that information to train the system. But if you're using the web version, and basically the native version of Chat GPT, they can take that information and they can use it to improve and develop their own services. So the upshot of these terms is that for your inputs into the Chat GPT system is that you should be careful with what you are providing. Strictly speaking, anything that you put into Chat GPT is a public disclosure, at least when you're using the web interface version. Again, there's an exception when you're using, or at least there could be an exception when you're using the API version of Chat GPT. And once you've put something into that web interface, the company has no obligation to keep anything that you've used as a prompt to the system as confidential. This is true that you should be careful with all confidential information that you put into the system. But it's especially true for information that might be part of an invention disclosure, because there are considerations about whether or not you can still have protection over that information when it comes to applying for a patent. Additionally, if you input personally identifiable information into the system, there are mechanisms that ChatGPT outlines to remove personally identifiable information from the system, but it's not clear how easy to use that system is going to be, and they've actually stated on a published FAQ page that they are not able to delete specific prompts. So maybe they could delete certain information from their system, certain personally identifiable information, but they don't delete specific prompts from the system. So be careful what you're sharing on the front end, because once you've given it to Chat GPT, it's in their system and they have access to it. When it comes to using outputs of the system, I think there should be a little bit of a buyer beware mentality that you should have when you're approaching the system. The terms of use specifically emphasize that the user is the one who's responsible for ensuring that the content, and again, that includes input and output, does not violate any applicable laws, and that would include copyright and patent laws. So you are responsible not only for what you're putting into the system as far as violating the terms of use, but anything that comes out of the system that you use, you are responsible for that. So you as the user need to take measures to be careful that however you use the output from Chat GPT, that you're not violating someone else's intellectual property, just as you would for an original work that you didn't get out of one of these language models that you just wrote or created yourself. So the idea should really be that you use the output of a system like this as a starting point, a means to generate further ideas. That's a better idea than taking a piece of output and using it unchanged, because you have no guarantee from ChatGPT that it doesn't violate someone else's copyright. And according to the terms of use, you as the user are responsible for any violation of laws that comes from use of an output of the system. Another consideration here for the outputs is that, generally speaking, ChatGPT outputs do not include or tend to be pretty light on citations or attributions. And that's important for a number of reasons. One is that you can't be certain of whether or not it's using somebody else's copyrighted material. And another one is that you just can't be certain of the reliability or accuracy of the information. So again, the outputs that you get from ChatGPT should be a starting point, and you should use other tools and sources and human review of the information to ensure that that information is accurate and not owned by somebody else. ChatGPT actually specifically contemplates the idea of two users getting similar or identical outputs from the system, and includes that in their terms of use. So I think another way of looking at the ownership issue here is that it's entirely possible that two people putting two different prompts or even the same prompt could get similar or identical outputs from the system. So OpenAI is assigning to you all of its rights to the output to the extent it has those rights. But if somebody else gets an identical output, it is also assigning all those rights to that other person who got that exact same output. Another thing to think about here is that independent creation's a defense to a copyright infringement claim. So if two parties own the same output, neither can really be an infringer against the other. This is just something to consider, that even if you get and have the right to use an output from ChatGPT or a similar system, the concept of ownership is something that's going to develop over time, and you can't be sure that you're the only one that has gotten this output from the system. OpenAI, they also explicitly recognize the fact that they can't ensure the accuracy of their outputs, and it incorporates that into the terms as well. A lot of the information online talks about how the system is only as good as the information that trains it. And as we all know, there's plenty of information on the internet that is used to train these systems that is not accurate. So check your output, treat it warily and as a starting point for further work, but don't take it on faith that the responses from the system are accurate. The term about accuracy in the terms of use says that you should evaluate the accuracy as appropriate for your use case, including by using human review of the output. And I think that's the key, is that you can use this as a tool, but using your own your own judgment and your own eyes is going to be critical to using the outputs of the system. Now, switching over to another one of the agreements, the usage policies. This is basically OpenAI's way of asserting some level of control over how people use the product. So if you violate these terms, they will either ask you to change the way that you're using the product to bring it into line with compliance with the terms. But if they have to repeatedly contact you, or if your violation is serious enough, they may suspend your access. And they also reiterate here that these policies, like all of their policies, all of their agreements, can change whenever they want. So it's really on the user to be up to date on what the usage policies are. Sorry. So in the usage policies, there's a portion of it that talks about how you are required to cite to the fact that you've used Chat GPT for certain uses. So I think it's a good general policy where if you're using an output from Chat GPT in some way, that you should cite to that fact just as you would cite to another source when you're making a publication. But in the case of using Chat GPT outputs for medical, financial, and legal industries, at least in consumer-facing types of applications, and also in news generation or news summarization, you as the user of this information must provide a disclaimer to users informing them that AI is being used and of its potential limitations. So this is their way to say you can't just, or according to our terms, you can't just take out what we give to you as an output and put it out there without notifying the public that this came from one of these language models. There are also in the usage policies, there are a number of prohibited industries, places where they say that you cannot use these services in support of activities that are in these industries. Many of them are illegal, fraudulent, inherently dangerous, risky uses. So think, human trafficking, drug use, things like that, things that are inherently risky or dangerous places to be using any kind of technology. But there are some other places where they say that you're prohibited from using Chat GPT per the usage policy that you might not have thought of without reading the usage policy. Some examples are here. They want to stay out of political campaigning, personal privacy violations, financial advice without a qualified person reviewing the information, and I thought the last one was particularly interesting: management or operation of critical infrastructure. So basically, they've determined what areas are either important or dangerous enough that Chat GPT shouldn't be used as a tool in these industries, at least at this time. So keep that in mind for what purpose you're using Chat GPT for. Even if you're not using it for something that's inherently dangerous, there might be one of these places where the terms of service prohibit the use of the language model. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the privacy policy. If you want heightened privacy for your data or the data of your users or customers, or the ability to negotiate any of the terms of these agreements directly, the API version of ChatGPT has some additional opportunities for that, whereas the native web-based version, again, does not. So incorporating ChatGPT into your product offered some privacy protections that the standard version does not. And that's explicitly stated in the privacy policy, that it doesn't apply to content that we process on behalf of customers of our business offerings, such as our API. They make individual agreements with those customers, or at least they offer that as an option. The type of information that gets collected falls into a couple of different buckets here. There's user provided information, which is your account information, the content, communication information, social media information. That's the stuff that you give to the company when you're setting up your account. And then there's also automatically collected information that comes from your usage of the system that they automatically collect as you're making requests of the system, as it's making, as it's providing outputs to you, and analytics information as well. And then they enumerate some of the ways in which they use personal information. It's fairly general, but I think it's important to review what these uses of personal information are, just so that you can be aware and make an educated decision of what you actually want to provide to the system. So that's a summary of the terms of use, the usage policies, and the privacy policy. Again, these policies could change over time, and they could add additional agreements that become critical to use of the products. But I think this gives a pretty good outline for the framework in which the company treats content, both the input from the user and the output that they generate from the system. So I'll hand it back over to Drew, or we can go right to Randy.
We can go right to Randy. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Great. Let me get my screen up here. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. As Drew mentioned, I'm Randy Ruth, Marshall Kirstein Boren. We're here in Chicago today. I'm excited to be able to talk about this. This is my first presentation on Chat GPT. So I had to create this slide deck from whole cloth over the weekend, actually, or late last week. And I actually used Chat GPT to generate my slides. So I hope you'll find them at least interesting and see a little bit of the power of what this could do. Now, there's a lot of work that I had to do to revise them, but the first draft was purely Chat GPT based on the inputs that I put in, and I was pretty happy with the output. What we'll be talking about today is sort of the technical aspects of Chat GPT, the IP landscape and considerations, the human inventor and the human author. I left in here some ownership slides, but that's we'll be skipping those because Brian covered those. And then risk of use. So ChatGPT, how it's trained and its limitations. So don't worry if you don't understand all of this after hearing this today. If you can grasp 10% of it, that'll be great. This is the type of thing that I think I had to hear 10 times before I really started to understand how this works. But essentially, the way ChatGPT as a large language model works is that it was trained using reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, which is a hybrid approach that uses both supervised and reinforcement learning. So the first column there starts with you collect data and you train a supervised policy. So there's actually human involved. And what the trainers did at OpenAI was they drafted a prompt or a question, and then they also drafted a response, which would be an ideal response. And they used that to train. They took one of their previous models. So ChatGPT, this is I think we're on version 4 now. They've had previous versions that were available. So this is sort of fine tuning that and enhancing and improving it. And we've gotten to the point now where it's so good that that's what a lot of the hype is about, and all the media attention that we're seeing. But back to the training. So they took the humans were involved in this first step where they're sort of labeling or training the algorithm to fine tune it and optimize it. They take that output, and then they also used humans to create this comparison data and train a reward model. So they created this reward model, the humans did, that then they could automatically run on the output. And what that training model did, a reward model did, was it looked at the outputs, and then it ranked them from best to worst. And then it used that to feed back into the model. And then the outputs come up to this third step, which is in the third column there, and it's optimize a policy against reward model using PPO, reinforcement learning algorithm. So this is just a quick overview of what Chat GPT specifically looks like from a technical perspective and how it works. I'll explain a little bit more here. The models were trained on a really large amount of data, and that's what has led to the the fantastic results that you see with the outputs. It is interesting to note that the data that they used to train this on, they scraped data from the internet, lots of different articles, websites all over the place. But most of what that data came from was about 2021. And it was finished at about spring of 2022. So in other words, what that means is the model has no knowledge of anything post spring of 2022. So it has no knowledge of any recent information, current events of any sort, of any type whatsoever. There is, and Brian did mention this, there's a fair amount of human error and bias in this type of a model. Supervised reinforced learning requires humans to determine the feedback for Chat GPT to learn from, and it's limited to the thoughts and perceptions of the human trainers to generate the outputs. So it's what they thought would be, what the trainers thought would be an ideal response. So there's inherent biases in that. That's biases. We could have a whole nother discussion on biases and how to eliminate biases when training a model. But they're inherent and always there, and that's something that should be understood. There's also no true comprehension. So the way ChatGPT works is it generates outputs that are semantically or syntactically plausible, but are in fact, may in fact at least be incorrect or nonsensical. These are called hallucinations. So hallucinations are an inherent problem with large language models. To give you an example of how it works is, you may not understand that, ChatGPT is so good that it seems like it's a sentient being or an entity that is conscious and understands what you're asking and understands what his responses are. But that's actually not true. It does not understand your questions, and it does not understand the output. What it does is it looks at your input, your prompt, takes a guess at what it thinks you're asking, and then makes a prediction on what the output should be. And it does that one word at a time. So we'll take a look at, the previous two words in the beginning of the sentence, and then it'll make a prediction of what the third word, next best word should be. And then it'll generate that word. And then it'll go to the next word and look at the previous three words, including that next word, and make a prediction and determine what that next word should be. And it continues doing this consecutively until it completes the entire sentence. And then it does that again and makes a prediction of what the next paragraph should be. So it simply spits out or outputs this information, and it does a really good job of it, making it seem very natural because it was trained on such large amounts of data. And as you can see here, the large language models have no idea of the underlying reality that language describes. So going to the next slide here, some limitations. This was a quote from OpenAI's CEO. ChatGPT is incredibly limited, but good enough at some things to create a misleading impression of greatness. And I think that I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. ChatGPT outputs sometimes lack reliability. At least outputs need to be revised and by someone in the appropriate field. For example, I asked it, tell me about Marshall Gerstein. And it gave me a very nice summary of about 3-4 paragraphs of our law firm. But in those paragraphs, it did have the date that the firm was created incorrect. I think it said it was 1999. It should have been 1955. So you can also ask it, information that and I guess that's what I would encourage you to do to get an understanding of what the limitations could be. Ask it questions when you're working with this that the answers to, that you understand really well. And you'll understand that inaccuracies will likely occur. And what's interesting is that it seems to have a very high level of conviction with its responses, even when it's incorrect. And in particular, if it is interpreting your prompt or your question incorrectly. So it doesn't, as a human might say, I don't understand your question, or maybe could you rephrase that? ChatGPT doesn't do that. It simply takes a guess and gives you an output. And it's up to you to take a look at that, make sure that it is answering the right question to begin with. And then you also have to look at the data of the response to make sure that it is accurate. As you can see, these are the different versions of Chat GPT, with the green one being the most latest version. And the trainers break down when they're evaluating the quality of the outputs or the responses. They essentially score the outputs in these different categories. And you can see that from the beginning, from the first version to this version, we went from these trainers believing that the responses were 50% quality and up to about 80% quality now. So significant increases just in these versions. And this is why, everyone's very excited to just try to imagine that over the next, year or two, as there's even more resources put into this, what the results can be and what the quality of the outputs can be. Despite its capabilities, ChatGPT 4 has similar limitations as early GPT models. Most importantly, it is still not fully reliable. It hallucinates facts. It makes reasoning errors. I mentioned a couple examples. So as Brian mentioned as well, great care should be taken when using it. It can be an incredible time saver, like it was for me in generating these slides, but you really do need to make sure that you're proofreading what it generates and correcting and making it accurate. But that's really not any different than if you're reviewing something from a subordinate or somebody, a student or somebody who's presenting a report to you. So moving into the IP landscape, U.S. patent filings for AI-related inventions have increased by more than 100% between 2002 and 2018. And it really has incrementing. I mean, the filings have increased nearly exponentially. You can see most of these these inventions. This data comes from the U.S. Patent Office. And purple is where the tech center that Art Unit 2100, which covers computer architecture and software, that's where most of these types of inventions are landing. But there's also some in other art units as well. But incredible increase. And you can see that this with patent applications in the US, they're kept secret for 18 months, which is why you see this line here. There's always this publication delay. So I think, as we get out, another year or two, we'll see that in 2022, in 2023, the numbers have continued to climb. I mean, I'm seeing that in my practice for sure. So we'll talk about in just a moment, patent law, copyright law, and trade secrets, and how ChatGPT impacts all three of those. The human as an inventor and the human author. So in general, starting with patents, in general, the question is, can AI be an inventor? And the general answer internationally, globally, is no. We'll focus mostly on the US, but several countries have addressed this, and there's been surprising consistency across the globe, and the patent offices who've all held that AI itself cannot be an inventor. It has to be human. And if we look at the US and in our code, 35 USC, which covers patent law, the term inventor is defined as an individual or individuals in plural who invented or discovered the subject matter of the invention. We have the benefit of a very recent case last summer in August at the Federal Circuit. So the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals is the appeals court that hears all patent cases that come up from the federal district courts, as well as appeals from the patent office. And this was an appeal from the U.S. Patent Office, where an inventor, I shouldn't say an inventor, where a person who owned a company that used AI to develop some technology submitted a patent application listing only the AI as an inventor. The U.S. Patent Office rejected the patent application. This was an appeal to the Federal Circuit and Court of Appeals. And that is the Thaler versus Vidal decision. And Vidal's was the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office. And the Federal Circuit affirmed the decision that in U.S. patent law, it requires at least one human inventor. It did raise the possibility in this decision of AI-assisted inventorship. So that's assisted. I think the key word is assisted there. AI is a creative machine. Let me take a quick drink. It didn't actually say that AI could be a co-inventor. It simply said that that question is not before the court. So we're not going to make a determination on that. But it did leave open the possibility. So, Time will tell if that's going to be possible, but for now, you need to have at least one a human inventor as an inventor at the patent office. And one would assume that if you tried to submit a patent application that lists only AI, such as one of these large language models like Chat GPT, that it would be rejected. It would not be examined, and you would not be able to get a patent. As I mentioned, joint ownership will be determined at some point in the future. Now moving to copyright. U.S. copyright, the short answer, I think the quick answer is no. AI cannot be an author of a work that can be copyrighted. And in the office's view, it's well established that copyright can protect only material that is a product of human creativity. Most fundamentally, the term author, which is used in both the Constitution and the Copyright Act, excludes non-humans. This comes from the Copyright Code. The human author, continued here, is material generated by ChatGPT copyrightable. So as Brian was talking about, OpenAI does transfer contractually ownership to you and states that whatever ownership it has, it grants to the, when in the output, it grants to the user. But if it doesn't have copyright ownership or doesn't have a copyright, it can't transfer that. And I think that's what we see here. So when an AI technology determines the expressive elements of its output, the generated materials is not the product of human authorship, and that cannot be copyrighted. So without a human authorship, the work generated material such as outputs is not copyrightable. So that's text, that's images. We've got models that can generate pictures just by putting in prompts, asking it to generate a particular picture and describing what you want it to show. It can generate that picture, and that also cannot, with the output of that actual picture cannot be copyrightable. What gets interesting is, when does generated material or output become copyrightable? A work containing AI generated material and sufficient human authorship by selecting, arranging, or modifying the output in a sufficiently creative way could amount to a modicum of creativity. So only elements with human authorship are copyrightable, not the actual outputs that are purely from a Chat GPT or other similar model, large language model. The original generated material, as I say, is not copyrightable. And an example, well, let me give you, I'll give you an example of this first, but first I'll tell you about a notice that came out from the U.S. Copyright Office just last week, which is pretty interesting. I think they're trying to keep up with this and doing the best they can. And essentially, they came out and said that it's now an obligation or a duty of someone looking to register a copyright who is using AI to assist with the creation of a work, that they must identify, they must attribute which portions of the work were created by AI and give attribution for those portions. So that looks to be like a new and a significant change at the Copyright Office. And here's an example why I think that's good, and I think it's important. So and this example will sort of illustrate these two different distinctions here between the output and how you might get some copyright protection. So if you wanted to use ChatGPT to create a book, for example, and you enter prompts and you tell it you want to generate to start with 10 different pictures, and you describe what each of those pictures are that you want to generate, and it generates the output of those 10 pictures. And then you tell it you want to generate 10 chapters, and you give it instructions and prompts for chapter 1 and chapter 2 and consecutive on down through chapter 10. And it generates all those different chapters. And you then take and compile those into a book, and you arrange where you want the pictures to go with which chapter. And then you put a copyright notice on that book, and you submit to the Copyright Office and say you want to copyright on that. Well, they need to understand what you contributed and what the AI contributed. So for example, there would be some human work that goes into identifying how many pictures you wanted, what they should look like, and arranging them in a certain sequence or a certain order, along with the text for the chapters. You were the one who determined what you wanted, how many chapters, what you wanted them to be about, and what the order was, and how you arranged them. So you would have a copyright, and it would be able to protect that book from being copied by someone else, but you can't protect individual pictures. So anybody could take any one of those pictures in your book and make as many copies as they want without avoid any copyright lawsuit. You can't protect the individual works that are output by the AI. Same thing with the chapters. You really couldn't protect the chapters, but you could have a protection in the compilation as a whole. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of what the current law looks like at the Copyright Office. Focusing on inputs, this I think is probably a little bit more intuitive, and that's while some prompts or inputs may be sufficiently creative to be protected by copyright, that does not mean that material generated from a copyrightable prompt itself is copyrightable. So if you write yourself a paragraph that you want to input into the model, that can, if it's sufficiently unique, that paragraph you could have copyright protection in that. The outputs you would not have protection in. I think that's pretty intuitive and pretty straightforward. Ownership, I mentioned it, I just included in here, so it's all together in one spot. Brian already touched on that. Risk of possible loss of rights. We'll talk about U.S. patent law and trade secrets. So in patent law, a claimed invention can be invalid if it is made available to the public more than 1 year before the effective filing date of the claimed invention. And this is just within the U.S. Outside of the U.S., it's even more strict. Most of the rest of the world are absolute novelty countries, meaning any public disclosure completely bars your ability to get a patent in those countries. They have no grace period. In the U.S., we do have this 1 year grace period. But that's what you have to be careful, as Brian mentioned, about what you put into. There's no expectation of privacy for what you enter into the prompts, into the questions. So if you're taking information that's proprietary or confidential, or it's medical records or things that you don't want to have publicly known, then you really shouldn't be putting those into a model like Chat GPT, because under U.S. patent law, as well as any patent office in the world, that's going to be considered a public disclosure that would no longer be confidential, and you would be barred from getting a patent on the technology that was described in your prompt or your input. So trade secrets are similar, as you can imagine. There's an obligation that for something to be legally considered a trade secret in the U.S., a company or a university must make a reasonable effort to conceal the information from the public, and submitting it into this information, any type of information that you believe is you're trying to protect as a trade secret, would destroy that trade secret. It would destroy your ability, even if it's inadvertently. That's unfortunate, but your trade secret would be blown, that you would have no protection. So how does Chat GPT handle user inputs? The user inputs, it's a question statement or otherwise text a user provides to Chat GPT. It can be, as Brian mentioned, it can be reviewed by OpenAI to help develop and improve that service under the OpenAI terms of use. In addition, I think that it can be used to retrain the model. I think if you're looking for a lot of times you're looking at competitors. If you're looking to spin off the technology that your university's innovating in, and those spin-off companies will want to have a competitive advantage against their competitors. And if you're taking your proprietary data, your confidential data that's important to you, and you're putting in this model, you could very easily be disclosing all that information to a competitor, and you have the opposite effect of getting competitive advantage. You'd actually be losing a competitive advantage based on those disclosures. One concept to potentially reduce the risk is to obtain a private instance of Chat GPT. I do have clients who I'm working with who are in the process. They've been told that private instantiations is an option. I haven't heard what the cost will be or how that will work, but I have heard that as a possibility. This would be sort of your own separate Chat GPT that's the pre-trained model that you could then install on a private network and fine tune it yourself with your own confidential data if you're interested in that. But basically, your queries would not be sent publicly over the internet or to a third party. So you'd be able to preserve your rights for patents and trade secrets. That's the end of what I have there. So I think we have a few minutes left for some Q&A.
Thanks, Randy and Brian. That was great. So we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to get right to it.
Okay.
This might be a question for Brian. Have the Chat GPT terms been reviewed by the university's procurement or general counsel team and cleared for individuals to use and use their university emails specifically to create an account?
So yeah, so I guess the short answer is no. The general counsel office has not, I guess, for lack of a better term, cleared the terms or anything like that. I mean, to the extent that you use your UMich email to create a personal account, it's still a personal account, and I think that you're able to do that. But I don't think there's any blessing of the terms of use here from the OGC's office.
Great. Let's see. So since ChatGPT can own anything that's fed into it, and they can use it to, I guess, retrain their models, how does ChatGPT know that the data gathered from other places is not copyrighted? So how does it know that the input is not copyrighted, I guess?
I think they don't for the most
I think a lot of it probably is, right?
Right. Yeah, if it's out there and it's published, there's some copyright.
Yeah.
So I think what you're relying on is the fact that the system is going to take whatever information it's trained on and create something else that isn't just the copyrighted work, but there's the possibility that it will. And that's why you can't just take the output and use it with any confidence that it's not going to violate somebody else's copyright. I don't know, Randy, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, we talked a little bit about, what's interesting here is what will happen when it generates outputs based on a copyrighted work. And I think, we talked yesterday about it being probably, fair use, being a derivative work. And, these are all questions that are unanswered yet. Our prediction, I think, or at least my prediction, is that from what I'm seeing is that this will be the fair use doctrine in this sphere will be looked at and given a pretty broad usage here. I think that it's in the U.S.'s interest, in the government's interest. I think for most experts seem to agree that the U.S. is ahead of China and ahead of number one in the world essentially for AI development. And if we are too restrictive with companies and what they're able to do with AI, and how they're able to, if they were to get hit with 5,000 lawsuits for copyright infringement, that would severely restrict what they're able to do. And I don't think that our government is going to be interested in doing that. So I think you're going to see the fair use doctrine looked at pretty broadly and looked at these as derivative works that are acceptable.
Makes sense. So the next question is there any way to tell if a person has used ChatGPT to write something? And I guess I'll also add a second question to it, which is I know there's a duty of disclosure to the Copyright Office to disclose if you use ChatGPT, but if someone does not do it, is there a way for them to know?
I think that the only way to know is that ChatGPT will know. It has a record of what the inputs and the outputs are. So there would be a technical way to find out, but I don't think that the Copyright Office is going to have access to that, at least in the near term.
Yeah, I'm not aware. I mean, I think you can enter the same question. So if you're asking questions of a student or somebody, and we've seen this in our recruiting for our firm, where we believe an applicant used ChatGPT for answering one of the questions. So, but we were able to see that because we asked the same question to ChatGPT, and the answers that we got were identical to what the applicant submitted. So we believed that applicant used ChatGPT because the answers were identical. But that's a fairly time-consuming, human intensive type of effort. I don't know how we'll be able to do this in an automated fashion going forward.
Right. Is there any recourse for copyright holders who see someone else's ChatGPT output and suspect that ChatGPT copied or otherwise wrongly violated the holder's copyright.
There is a way to report to ChatGPT if you think that there is a copyright violation. I'm not fully familiar with what the procedures are, but in the terms of use, there is a way to notify ChatGPT, and you can also request, I believe, if you want your copyrighted work to be removed from its training set, there's a way to request that.
As far as legally with copyright law, it depends if it's a registered copyright or not. There are limitations in timing for registered copyrights for when you have a certain amount of time before you have to, within which you must file a patent or a copyright lawsuit. So there are limitations, but it does depend on whether it's if you're relying just on the inherent copyright or a registered copyright.
Another question probably for Brian. Given that the bulk of work product created by university staff is owned by the university, what are the implications of an employee using ChatGPT as a work tool and feeding it with information? For example, if I wanted to enter my budget packet to translate that into a presentation.
I mean, I think that's risky because I think the rule of thumb that you should use is that you shouldn't be submitting confidential information into one of these language models because ChatGPT or OpenAI does not have any duty of confidentiality to the user. The odds of something being done with it might be very low, but at the same time, you just open the floodgates to somebody else having access to your budget packet with no obligation to keep it to themselves.
Is it possible for students or their parents to sue an instructor due to using ChatGPT for grading their answers to exam questions?
That would be, I think that'd be a stretch.
I don't know.
Fair enough.
It's a tough one.
But I'm trying to figure out what that situation would look like.
Right. I would guess that not a lot of people know.
I wouldn't take that on a contingent basis. That case, put it that way.
All right. Given the potential for ChatGPT to be used in future tools such as Microsoft Excel, how can we ensure that sensitive company data won't be leaked through the use of this technology? And I guess some of this was covered in your slides, but is there anything?
Yes. So my take on that one is that's going to be covered by Microsoft's terms of use because they're going to have an agreement with ChatGPT because it's going to be the API application, right? Mm-hmm. And my presumption is that any of those terms of use are going to say, we won't use your data for X, Y, I, and Z. It's going to stay within this system. They're going to have procedures in place because otherwise it's not going to be a viable product for them, at least on like an enterprise level.
So there's a question here. Do you think ChatGPT will be banned or I guess, more strictly regulated by the US government? And then they say just like Italy, but I think that ban might have been to do with the GDPR rules rather than, the generative AI aspect itself, but.
Do I think there's more regulation coming? Yes, in the US. Europe has a proposal out already. It's EU AI, I think is what they call it. It's a pretty extensive package of regulation for AI, and I think this would fall within that. The GDPR came from Europe. That's sort of now been adopted, arguably adopted worldwide as sort of the base level of where privacy is. That very well could happen with EU AI as being adopted worldwide as the base level, but there's a lot of regulation in that package. But for sure, even if that doesn't get adopted, for sure there will be regulation coming.
So someone else has asked, where can I find more information about the limitations of using ChatGPT or regulations around using ChatGPT in the medical industry?
I'm
Yes,
not aware of anything unique or specific to
Okay.
any industry. But again, we're, a few weeks out
Sure.
from the announcement of ChatGPT 4. So
Right.
stay tuned. We might have more information.
Webinar number 2. All right, we have a few fun questions that I'm going to ask just to mix things up. So I have a question. Does the Federal Circuit's ruling on AI inventorship still apply if ChatGPT becomes fully self-aware?
I think so. I mean, right? I mean, I think it's still going to require a human inventor. I don't think I don't see them taking away that requirement anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, most experts 2 years ago had said that they thought general AI, which is true sentient thinking AI, which is what you see in the movies, is 50 years to never being achieved. I don't know what people are guessing now, because I mean, I'm seeing just an explosion of life-changing machine learning algorithms that are going to be life-changing, especially in the medical field. It's fantastic. It's exciting to see. I haven't heard any other experts say that it's going to be quicker. It could. We don't know, but we're still a pretty long way away from achieving true AI, sentient, conscious AI.
So we've got a few variations of this question, which is, if I specify a duty of confidentiality in my question and ChatGPT answers, does that create a duty of confidentiality for it? So basically, does your input override the terms of use?
I think the answer would be that the system can't make an agreement on behalf of the company. There's not a person agreeing to that on the other end. And so I think the answer is no. There would be no duty of confidentiality then.
I agree.
Another question, and this is about Microsoft. You've talked a lot about OpenAI. Can you comment on the nature of the relationship between OpenAI and Microsoft? Is it known whether and to what extent data is shared between these entities?
I don't have that knowledge. I'm sorry. I wish I did, but
I know they're working together, but I don't know what that end product's going to look like.
Well, this is a fun one for Randy. As attorneys, do you see a risk to your profession from using AI platforms?
I think it was who's the big Goldman Sachs came out with a report last week that said 70% of legal work will be eliminated by AI within X number of years. Hard to say. I mean, I have to think that I'm a little bit, what I do as a patent attorney, I think is substantially different from what a contracts attorney does. I think there's a lot more repetition in generating contracts and certain other areas of law. Certainly we see some of these self-help tools already for wills and trusts and divorces and home closings, things like that are software tools that with the assistance of AI or machine learning can be even better and further reduce work for many attorneys. Hard to say, hard to predict that one.
So we have a few more questions. I guess we're almost at time. What velocity do you expect the USPTO to be getting OpenAI or ChatGPT rooted enabled inventions?
Drew, you might know this better than me, but I feel like we've been getting machine learning algorithms from University of Michigan, maybe going back about 4 years ago. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, probably the first ones we filed on 5 even longer, 5 years ago.
And an exponential, I mean, I'd say what I get from Drew, as well as, 90% of my practice is software. And I'd say half of what I get is, and this is consistent with what I see from Michigan too, what I get from Drew, is including machine learning. So it's a real explosion of that these algorithms.
Another question in the chat: how long does ChatGPT hold on to search queries? Do they delete it after some period of time?
There is no stated term for how long they keep your information. I'm guessing they're going to keep it to train future models on. So there's really no incentive for them to get rid of any of it at this point.
I agree. I would assume that it would be for eternity.
For eternity. All right, this is a long one. My understanding is that ChatGPT is trained on a lot of general data that can lead to some applications in medicine, but it's not trained on patient data per se. So they're asking if you've heard of institutions that are interested in providing de-identified patient data to train ChatGPT in return for, kind of like more advanced medical use cases.
I think this is too new. I don't think, I mean, that's a great idea. And I think I predict that will happen. I mean, just makes too much sense. But that's a prediction, only prediction. Brian, I don't know if you had, you may be.
No, I don't have anything to add there really.
I think this is a really pertinent question. So, short of seeking legal counsel, how can lay people stay up to date on applicable laws and regulations governing the use of AI systems?
It's hard. It just takes a lot of effort. I mean, you have to stay, just reading, you have to constantly read.
Yeah, like stay up to date on the blogs that are out there about AI specifically, about the legal aspects of AI. Set up your notifications for big stories that come out about it. But the other thing is with the agreements that are out there, you're just gonna have to check them on a semi-regular basis to see if there's changes that have happened.
All right. How much time do you guys have? Because I know we're 5 minutes out. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure, I
Okay.
do.
Great.
I was going to say one thing real quick on that other one. If you're not familiar with it, there's a thing called the State of AI report by a guy named Nathan Bainich and Ian Hogarth that's been being produced for about 5 years now. And it is actually, to the earlier point of the conversation, very interesting to go back and read that now. What they thought even a few years ago versus what they think about today. So I think that's a very interesting read if you're looking for something specific. And it is stateof.ai.
Do you have recommendations for preventing your content from being scraped by ChatGPT from a legal standpoint? So I'm guessing they're talking about data that people put up on the internet. Does it have to be copyrighted or trademarked beforehand, or can you put it behind a legal agreement?
We talked about this one yesterday, Brian. You want me to handle it or you?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think the answer is there's nothing you can do to stop it. So if it's public, it can be scraped and it will most likely be scraped. So a copyright is, I mean, there are two different issues. You won't destroy your copyright if somebody, if one of these large language models scrapes the information, it doesn't destroy your copyright or affect it in any way. But you can't stop them from doing that. There's nothing, there's no legal document that you can put in place to do that. It's public. I mean, the only thing you can do is if you don't want it scraped, is you'd have to put it behind some type of pay firewall or some sort of a firewall that would prevent scraping bots from accessing it.
And I think the only other weapon you have at your disposal is vigilance, right? Like if you find out I don't know how you would, but if you find out that one of these services has scraped your work, and they have a process to remove your work from their database, then you can do that. But that's just going to take a lot of vigilance.
And then I guess this can be the last question. Can you talk more about private instances of ChatGPT? So I'm guessing it's related to the terms of use, what the privacy policy is, and are they available yet to protect sensitive data?
Yeah. My understanding is that you can incorporate one of these private instances, these APIs into your product. I don't know the specifics on how it works, but I believe they are available now. I don't know, Randy, if you're more familiar with it.
I've got clients who've told me that they're in negotiations to do that, but I don't have any more of the details. I don't have costs or timing or anything like that.
All right, I think that brings us to the end with 3 minutes to spare. So thank you so much, Randy and Brian. This was great. And, we actually got a lot of questions related to the use of ChatGPT in education and kind of the ethics surrounding that, which obviously wasn't pertinent to the topic of this webinar, but that at least gives us a clue of what the next webinar should be. Like Drew mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar, and we host all the videos in our YouTube channel. So you'll have that link sent to you by email shortly. Thanks again.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.